Dr. Ulrich, this is the Global Digest Think Tank Group. You are our guest today.
I used to work as a research fellow for the German Armed Forces in Berlin, and we did applied research there. And while I was working there, I pursued a PhD in sociology, and I focused on military sociology, which is like a sub field of sociology. Very small one, very specialized. And within military sociology, the focus is really on civil-military relations. And political scientists approach that also belong to military sociology. They would focus on the civilian control of the armed forces in a given country. And as sociologists look at it a little bit differently, they look more on the relationship between the armed forces and society and how they interact and what segments of the population join the armed forces. What is the influence of the armed forces on civil society? And that's where I'm still working and publishing with my colleagues in Berlin. I, however, have moved about 20 years ago from Germany to Canada, and I live now on the Atlantic coast of Canada in a province called Nova Scotia, and the capital is Halifax, and we have a few universities there. And I'm an adjunct professor at Dalhousie University.
Right.
I'm a naval reserve officer.
I see.
And so I bring some military background. And my PhD thesis really focused on the German armed forces, and specifically on the officer corps. It was the thesis is about the subject of so-called military culture. That is to say, we look at the military as an organization and try to distinguish it from other organizations and try to figure out what is specific about the military as an organization, or could also call it an institution of society. And basically my argument is that the military is is not an organization. It's a total institution. That and what that means is that there is no partial membership really. It's not an 8 to 4 job. You are really you're a soldier or you're not. And it takes us a very specific dedication to be a soldier in the armed forces. And that is very different from say working for IBM.
Right. Definitely. There are many different concepts, and some are very different perception, different understanding, and especially if we see in Burmese military, as you point out, that they are they are acting like this, as you said, organization. They are not doing duty or commitment for the nation or something, but they are like organization. They are not subject to anybody. They will do
Mhm.
whatever they will because they are organization. Actually, maybe opposite to what you were saying. German Navy is more institution or they are more about organization nowadays. Probably during Second World War, during Hitler, maybe they have different uh, military perception, probably. Yeah, but Hitler was elected, by the way. So it's also complicated, but you know more about German history, I guess.
That is an important point you're raising. You know, like that the military changes over history, and even in modern history, there are huge changes in countries like Germany, and then there are also like national differences between armed forces, um, say like take Denmark and Germany, or Denmark and Burma. You would see strong similarities. That's what I argue. You know, as in like uh, you have like an institution that potentially is allowed to use physical violence, you know, to conduct its purpose, which is very unusual for you know, like even for the police. It's in at least in democratic countries that's not the standard. So you have this like exceptional status in this profession, and but most of the time, you know, that's where I think it becomes interesting, as in for the concept of military culture, is the military does not apply physical violence. It's most of the time it's in a almost like a bureaucratic state, you know, where you are prepared for an exceptional situation, and but you the the armed forces train for that exceptional situation, but they hardly ever apply it really. And so I'm wondering. So my question in my thesis was, how what does that mean for the individual officer in the armed forces? That they are, on the one hand, mostly, some people don't like to hear that, but I would argue mostly bureaucrats who have to like be like firefighters, always be prepared for like an exceptional situation, but hardly ever really apply that the possibilities of that profession. That is to say, you know, use physical violence and kill opponents without uh, getting charged for murder, you know. So, and in my thesis, I conclude that a successful officer manages to be, on the one hand, you know, like an efficient bureaucrat, because there's a ton of administration in the armed forces, and at the same time display himself as a warrior, and that makes you like a successful member of the officer corps, definite, at least in the German armed forces, and I would argue in really in all standing armies.
You mean current German army?
In the current German armed forces, yes.
I see. Hitler is acting beyond democracy, or how's between Hitler and German army? How can you say they are more like military is like German military was like organization. They don't. I mean, they don't follow constitution probably. Civilians norm and standard they don't follow. But Hitler was elected leader, and maybe they follow Hitler, but Hitler also did not follow constitution or did not follow civilian norm and standard or democracy norm and standard. How can you say during German, Hitler regime?
Well, the 1930s were a very interesting phase in German history. Due to like the loss in First World War and then the Versailles Treaty, Germany was only allowed to have an army of 100,000 soldiers and a navy of 15,000 soldiers. And that was the situation in 1933 when Hitler came to power. And in 1 year later, in 1934, Hitler declared that he will not obey anymore the Versailles Treaty and is going to increase the German armed forces like something like at least tenfold. And that was it made him very popular among soldiers and also in the civil society. And then, but what happened was within the German army of the 1930s was that in that small army of 100,000, you had these traditional leaders who were usually came from nobility. And after, losing millions of leaders in the First World War, that was basically all that was left of nobility who were also officers. So in order to increase the armed forces, you had to bring in members of society who were usually not considered fit as officers, at least not as high-ranking officers. So you brought in middle-class people, often people who were very politically motivated because they were supporters of the Hitler movement. And so that created some tensions suddenly in the armed forces. And in 1938, there was the first kind of resistance amongst the nobility towards the civil government, the Hitler government. And then something happens that there are these instructions to get ready for war, and the officer leadership in the 1930s argued, yes, of course, you are our commander in chief, and we will follow your instructions, and expect us to be ready in about 5 years. Now, history, so Hitler didn't wait that long. So in 1 year later, in 1939, you have now this massively increased army, also technologically much like modernized army that is ready to attack, and they're going on attack, really. But so German population was a bit hesitant, apparent from what I know, because they remembered, like that the last war was not that long ago. It was just like that ended, just like 20 years earlier, and but the success was phenomenal. These armed forces that were like a really tiny army, actually, only like 6 years earlier, had become like the dominant army of continental Europe, and with a very aggressive military doctrine of this blitzkrieg approach of like massive use of air force and tanks. They were absolutely stunning. Like the Polish side, the French side,
Right.
and in the beginning were very successful.
And not to increase military, which means Hitler himself is a broken regulation, and he did not follow international norm and international law. You can say like that. But even the population is supported him fully, right? But German population supported him, but it's still he has obliged to obey international law and international norm, right?
Well, that's the thing about international law, like it's, on the one hand, it really exists, like since like the Hague Conventions on how to conduct warfare, and then you have like international treaties like the Versailles Treaty, but with international law, it's only as strong as it's supported, and with France being in a weak political situation, and it was easy for Hitler to argue we are not going to follow this treaty anymore, and he would refer to it as like a dictate, like something that didn't even have the qualities of international law, because it was forced upon Germany. So
has different conception.
Yeah, and he brought Austria into Germany, and and that was okay with Britain and France. Then he invaded in 1938 Czechoslovakia, and Britain and France didn't really react to that, and even Poland got a little bit of Czechoslovakia. So relationship with Poland wasn't as bad as many people think these days.
See.
And then he surprised Poland by this secret deal with the Soviet Union, which was supposed to be their biggest enemy, to conquer and share a Poland, just like Russia and Prussia did, like about 200 years earlier.
See, so you can say that time German military, as you said, a lot of Nobel people in the army, but
Yeah.
during Hitler time, those who are very important in the military, those Nobel people, the officer in the military, they left the military or it's fired by Hitler, and they were substituted by those unfit for military, and they enter in the army. So the military become not standard and not professional military during Hitler. Can you say that?
I wouldn't say they weren't fit. I would say you all of a sudden had a much younger army. You know, like those young officers, like lieutenants, who joined the army. They came fresh from high school,
Oh,
and but
maybe
the whole
amateur
society
young people.
but the whole society had really changed a lot back to like a military mindset. So there was like a very harsh training regime, and people were motivated. You know, like they were also careerists. You know, these young men who joined. You know, like imagine like there was massive unemployment in Germany, like in the 1920s. Like people felt they had no future, and then Hitler gets elected, and then in 1934 the imperial president dies, and Hitler says, from now I'm not just chancellor but president as well. Gets massive funding from the German industry and gets into but has to take up enormous loans. Like the debt was massive that he created within a few years. So really Hitler needed that war to pay off the debt. And that's why he couldn't wait for like the army to be as ready as the army would have wished to be. And then there's just like one success after another, you know, like people were almost shocked how successful, like Germans were shocked how successful like the Hitler army was in 1939, 1940. Then Italy joins the Axis, and Germany starts kind of like turning this whole war into like a European concept almost. You know, you must not forget that there was like the German army, but then there was also like a basically a political army, the Waffen SS, which was a bit in a competition to the Wehrmacht, the like imperial army, and they were open to membership from European nations. So there was huge percentages of like soldiers from like the Baltic states, from Ukraine, from like Scandinavia, from the Netherlands, even from France, joining the Waffen-SS. So suddenly, this whole war is not just about like a war between Germany and Poland. It becomes, I say that
European army.
it becomes a bit of a European army, and like it might sound a bit strange, but it has been argued that actually Hitler wasn't really like a German nationalist, how he often is portrayed, but that he was really saw himself as an imperialist who would unify Europe just like the Romans did 2,000 years earlier.
So even Hitler able to convince many European countries to in recruiting soldier, right? So a lot of
Yeah,
European
into
countries
the Waffen SS. Yeah.
that's under Hitler army, right? Under Hitler. So and can you say by that time a lot of noble people in German army are gone, no more. So it's the army become uh, less morality and uh, no more standard army.
The like the morality of the conduct of war was really ingrained in the German nobility, in the noble officer corps, and they became more and more critical. They really did dislike the Waffen SS, and they disliked that the way the war was conducted, because it was it it was a warfare against, not between, like, not that much anymore between combat troops, like military opponents, like in the First World War, but it really was a warfare against the civilian society. And that's where traditionally, like, the Prussian officer corps would draw the line. And the Wehrmacht became involved in in warfare against the civilian population in like the Balkans, in Greece, in Poland, in Russia, in Ukraine. And that's where like slowly but steadily the a resistance grew in among like the traditional noble officer corps.
How can you say civilian control military? That they did control, as you said, a lot of civilian support and civilian join, but a lot of soldiers are just high school graduate. And it's, you can say, over control, or they are derailing the civilian control over military. How can you categorize this?
See, that was an exceptional time, like where you have this you still have the supremacy of civilian control by like the commander of chief, who's Adolf Hitler, and but the you have less and less of a distinction between military leadership, as in like the German, like the military staff, and the political influence, and like a totalitarian system, like like Nazi Germany. They could say they really overstepped like the civil military relations, because they very actively interfered into like decision making, and also introduced rules that were until then foreign to the German armed forces. For instance, in the Balkans, there were like Berlin introduced a rule that for every German soldier killed by like by non-combat individual, like irregular forces, would be revenged by killing 100 civilians. That was like unheard of in the Prussian military, and
mass killing.
and that's where like huge resistance, not huge resistance, but where resistance kind of developed, and there were like I for good reasons like several attempts actually to kill Hitler by the traditional officer corps,
I see.
which was for many of them like problematic, because most of them had Christian values, or where you say, well, killing is wrong, killing your own. And of course, they were also formed by like kind of like in an authoritarian thinking of like, this is the commander in chief. I'm an officer. I've sworn an oath, to the commander in chief, and yet things were so bad that like a group of about like, I would say like 600 officers or so plotted against the civilian regime, and then in 1944, on July 20th, tried the coup d'etat to get rid of Hitler, who they believed they had, who was dead, and they almost managed to change the regime.
I see. So at the beginning, Hitler was democratically elected, and he is doing democratically. He did performance, but slowly, as you said, it's become totalitarianism and dictatorship style, and it's based slowly and more dictatorship, right? And also during that time, having more dictatorship mean he may also make a lot of military regulation changes. German army become more and more dictatorship at the end of Hitler regime, and most noble people are gone. And so nobody at the time, apart from noble people, to correct the military standard. Nobody want to speak out.
Nobody is able to speak out openly. Like Hitler got elected not with a majority, but with a minority, and was first in a coalition government, and in like a few months after his election, he declares like a state of emergency, uh, imprisons opposition politicians already in March 1933, and then people argue, okay, that might be necessary, but things change very quickly. And like in June 1934, there is like the so-called like or something like political murders happen, including two generals getting murdered and by the government, and they also murder their own Nazi opposition, because like the Nazi movement was split. There was this more like socialist level wing and the SA, and their entire leadership gets killed in the so-called like Night of the Long Knives. And so by 1934, the country is a dictatorship. There's no question about that. And but still, they're successful. They're building infrastructure projects, like the Autobahn. They're hosting the Olympic Games in 1936, which gave them huge reputation. They are collaborating with Ford in the United States, and Ford is building car factories in Germany. So in the Time magazine declares Hitler like person of the year in 1936. So all of a sudden, like the country that was so humiliated after the First World War and went through such hardship in the 1920s, all of a sudden everyone felt like, this is great. We are the number one again, and we get recognized, and we're doing the right thing here. And but soon, like the old elite in the German armed forces realizes this is going to lead right into the next war, and we're not prepared. And through this like massive increase of the armed forces, like you have like all of a sudden conscription again, and massive spending on armament. This army is very successful in a short amount of time, and then, but like it big, like kind of like I would argue from that by 1941, like once the German army invaded Russia and didn't manage to get to Moscow, so they were kind of like started their attack too late, and were overstretched. And they kind of got stuck there in the mud in the fall and the snow in the winter, and got stuck. And that was really like, I would argue, the end of the war. Once they tried to invade Russia and didn't take out Moscow, that was it. And at the same time, during the invasion of Russia, there were like massive atrocities happening against like regular civilian population, like burning down villages, murdering people. And of course, then they also started like the started the short, like in 1942, really started focusing the extermination of the European Jewish population. And that was very shocking to at least the traditional officer leadership, they were not used to this type of warfare, that focused so much on like domination and extermination, and that's where like a sense of resistance started. And but no, but by then it, like in a like a this was not just like any dictatorship. This was a very totalitarian dictatorship. Like everyone knew that you couldn't even make a joke about Hitler. Like there were like Catholic priests who got killed for making a joke about Hitler. It was like to this extent, there was like absolutely no freedom of speech. So it was very hard to plot against Hitler. Like afterwards, and like these days people wonder, why didn't people rebel? Why didn't anyone, try harder? And people had to do this, like playing a game of like, yes, I'm a German officer and I obey orders, and at the same time have at night plot and organize ways to potentially get rid of the head of state. It's a very old debate in among historians in Germany and political scientists to whether Hitler was right wing or left wing, and I don't. This debate is like decades old, and it continues. And I don't think it. In the end, it doesn't matter, in my opinion. He was absolutely totalitarian, and
Right.
and in that sense, you might compare it to other totalitarian regimes, like in the People's Republic of China, where there's economic freedom, but there's absolutely no social freedom or freedom of speech.
Right.
And like the and you had the same situation in Soviet Russia with Stalin. Very similar. He also exterminated huge groups of his own population by sending them to Siberia or starving them to death, like in Ukraine. And I believe like China does similar practices. Like when you look at these Uyghurs or like the Tibetan minority.
Right.
But the huge exception that makes like the Hitler regime so outstanding is like the industrial destruction of an entire people. Like that is not even something that that Stalin did. Like by organizing death camps that were really not just there for hard labor, where like hundreds of thousands died, but really with the intent to like destroy life. Even like don't even care about the labor. It just had this mission of the entire extermination of the European Jews. So that's
So,
where I would argue the comparison needs to end. Because not even China or Soviet Russia went that far.
right. So, you can say Hitler is very terrible, very cruelty, killing people, something like that. And definitely, dictatorship system, German dictator, they don't have left wing or right wing. Dictatorship has no not necessarily left wing and right wing. Only in democracy we can say left wing and right wing. I mean, they are negotiables and check and balance, but it cannot doing it cannot have any dictatorship. They don't accept any negotiation, any balance, check and balance. So it doesn't make for Hitler to be called left wing or right wing. It doesn't make sense for Hitler, I guess. And that one thing is during Hitler regime, you know, definitely within Germany and within military, since the Nobel people are also gone and nobody can able to speak out. So within Germany is not possible, but at least international community can pressure, it should be pressure Hitler regime, but it's also failed, international community failed. Instead, they are confusing, supporting 1935-36 during Hitler become more popular. That I think international community pressure is not that much, I think. So that Hitler can be able to do dictatorship far beyond. And definitely media, communication, social media are not available at the time, so nobody can know information. So there was no social media pressure, no social media, highlighting about Hitler regime. So definitely the absence of social media, that's Hitler go beyond dictatorship and very cruelty and killing massive people. So that was German military. When you compare to Burmese military regime, they are on the same category of dictatorship, military regime. And Burmese case is not civilian control military. I don't know about Danish military. How can you say Danish military is military, civilian control military, or it's institution or its organization? How can you say that?
Well, I mentioned the Danish armed forces because years ago I did some research project on the multinational corps in Szczecin, which consists of like the Danish armed forces, the German armed forces, and the Polish armed forces. And it became very obvious that there are really vast differences, that German armed forces were very formal and the Danish armed forces were rather informal, very kind of like laid back. And that there were like we got asked in as researchers to look into like what is happening there, because there were like tensions, especially between the Danish officers and the German officers, and what became like,
I don't know. Danish, I don't know Danish
professionalism.
I don't know Danish. They have properly military army, or they don't have proper military army, because small it's a bit small country, you know.
It's a
Sometimes
small country and
they
a small
don't they
military.
don't they don't want to have proper military, as you said. Yeah,
Oh, they would disagree with that. They
I
would
see.
think that they are very professional military, actually. They would probably argue they are more professional than the German armed forces. They are a kingdom. They used to have the Danish Empire used to be pretty big, but that was like 300 years ago. But they're still very proud of those days, and they just have a different idea about hierarchy. Their sense of professionalism is much more almost like a civil professionalism. Like how do we get the job most efficiently done? And that might have to do with like their like political culture and because of the size, but they get the job done. They're really good, in fact. And there was, but if you don't really address these differences, in your like leadership concept, for instance, that leads to huge misunderstandings because there's they speak in English. There's a German officer. There's a Danish officer. They are neighboring countries. They look the same, and they really don't understand each other.
Really.
Yeah, that's what I found so fascinating because the like assumptions were so different, but like you look alike. Your uniform looks basically the same. You speak English. You're serving as NATO countries, and so it's not obvious that there are differences, And what we did is we looked into like leadership practices and communication practices and could help them to identify like where the differences are, not saying this is better, this is worse, but just like you need to be aware that you're not the same you know
So, can you say that Danish army, they are more, they promoted army officer based on their skill and their performance. If they are doing very good performance, they did a lot of successful in the army, and they are more standard and more professional. They get promoted, or in that way, they are more professional. Uh, in case of in Burmese military, it doesn't matter you are qualified or you are professional or any success or very good soldier. They don't care as long as the chief of army has favorite whatever they can make bribe or favor from the chief of command. Your chief of commander is promoted, officer. So those
yeah.
can drive and favorism to chief of command. They just promoted officer. But I don't know in Danish, what do you mean about they are more professional?
um I had a very positive impression of the Danish armed forces. On they they were very efficient in the way they approached a task, and um, in the sense that like you would like an say like an a lieutenant gets an order. He wouldn't be told how to do it. That would be up to him. But he would be told, I want this problem solved, and I don't care how you do it. in the German armed forces, technically, that's also our leadership philosophy. And but in fact, in reality, it's a bit of a problem, like it can be rather hierarchical in the German armed forces. I think in the American armed forces, it's even worse. But so this kind of like more
Command structure.
like horizontal management approach that the Danes showed, like with a small army of, I don't even know, 20, 30,000 soldiers, it seemed to work really well, and they still, like they were still soldiers, but they approached leadership very differently than the in German armed forces, and definitely the Polish armed forces. At least back then when we did this research.
In German army, it means same like Burmese army. The commander in chief promoted those officer if commander chief favorite, or they can able to make bribe commander chief regardless of their quality or their performance, their success. Just commander in chief is promoted in his own favorite. But Danish case is not like that.
Well, I don't think that's the case in Denmark. However, currently there is a debate in 2025 on like who gets promoted in the German armed forces to the top as top generals and who doesn't. And some retired generals are quite critical of who's getting promoted for what qualities. And there was just like a very good general, and even he was even commander of that multinational corps. And he argues that currently the top soldiers are getting promoted according to political criteria and not for like professional criteria. So that is that's happening right now, that debate. And you can imagine that's especially now that the German armed forces are getting like reinforced and getting a lot of like political attention, and there is like huge budget increases. That's a very sensitive subject. Do you get promoted because you are in line with the political agenda of the minister, or do you get promoted because you're the best general and the most skilled individual? It's an old question, like
Right. I mean, a political agenda should be also there, and at the same time, professional agenda should be also there. I mean, can you say Danish case, they are promoted more based on professional background, not by monarchy or political agenda? It's like that in Denmark, or because they use, as you said, Denmark officer should have their own solution. They should know how to do solution, not just from instructed from their boss. They should able to know their own solution, and they should know different solution and different kind of solving problem. So in case of them, so it's you can say it means they are more professional based in Denmark.
Well, that was our impression from the study we did there at this multinational core, and that's 20 years ago when we did that. And I don't think it has changed much in the Danish armed forces. And I'm, like I've been in Canada now for 20 years, so I don't I I follow the news, and I follow debates, and I have conversations with colleagues, and so I believe I have an idea of what's going on in the German armed forces. And from what I see, there's still like an ongoing debate about, like what does it mean to be professional.
About Denmark, as you mentioned, Denmark used to be emperor and they control many area. Why they could not able to protect the whole Greenland because it's under Denmark control. It means Denmark army is so weak or so small army, or because now they are relying on U.S. Army, right? So why they could what is their weakness in able they are unable to influence Greenland, or they could not able to manage military could not able to manage in Greenland.
See, Greenland was pretty important in the Second World War. It's not very widely known, but in order to win the war in the Atlantic, Greenland was crucial. So they were Denmark was basically occupied. So the Americans had like garrisons in Greenland, and that was really important for the Allies to win the war of the Atlantic. And then after the Second World War, the Americans never left. you know. And they have a huge army, a huge country. They're economically and politically and militarily very powerful. And so far, it was collaboration between the Americans and the Danish government and the Danish armed forces. And now, since this year, there's like a very confrontational course coming from Washington that has all of a sudden brought Denmark on the map again, Greenland on the map again, and like who it's there. It has a very small civil population of, I believe, like 70 or 80,000 people. Like.
Right.
And it's quite a ways from Denmark, and
Also,
Denmark
maybe
is a small, very successful, rich country, but it's still small. Like
they have
they have
no
they have
capacity.
they have no capacity to say, please, Americans, leave us alone, go home. That's impossible.
Right. I mean, it's some made sense American troop in Greenland because American are kind of backing or protecting Europe because still with inside Europe also many American army are here, in Germany, Poland. So Greenland is not that it's not much to say because even inside European, there are many European let them base American soldier because it is unable to compete with Russia, Russia, huge army. So American
Yeah.
staying inside Europe is security. If suddenly attacked, immediately that can be able to help each other. If
Yeah.
there are no American base, it will be their own, European, they are also, which means they have more guarantee being inside Europe. So similarly, Greenland, they can consider they are American staying here, they can be more guarantee. But I don't know how they make a deal between Denmark, Greenland, US. Even Greenland, they want to be independent, right? Complicated, I guess.
It's a very complicated situation because, yeah, they are the like small local government. They really like their autonomy, and now which was a hard battle to get that autonomy from Denmark because there were also very bad things happening, in Greenland. In Greenland, like what the Danish government did with the local population there, and so now they're in between a rock and a hard place. Do we want to stay with Denmark, which we are not so fond of, or do we want we are too small to be really have to become independent, or do we want to join the Americans and hope for some autonomy with the Americans and be better off with them? So that's going to be very interesting to watch what the domestic politics in Greenland are going to look like, because suddenly the northern hemisphere and along the Arctic Circle is becoming of an area of international interest due
Right.
to the conflict between the United States and Russia. So that is definitely something to watch.
And about Burmese army, definitely Burmese army is not a civilian control military,
Yeah,
They want to get out of civilian control, and they want to be uh, organize themselves separately, and they want to run their own institution, or its more organization with their own military. Even last time civilian government, they still not under civilian control army. The army is still separate, their own regulation and their own command structure. President or any civilian leader never able to change it or command military as other democratic countries. What kind of the army category?
they want what the Imperial Army in Germany was in the 1920s, which was called a state in a state.
Right.
So they want complete autonomy. They want to have basically their own jurisdiction, and no political or civilian interference. Just so it sounds a bit like that. Historical comparisons are always tricky because things change and nothing's really the same. But that comes to mind what you just mentioned.
Right. So what are the problem about those army, Imperial or Burmese army?
Basically, the problem is that in a civilian society with an elected government, even with an unelected government, do you have an institution that can with physical violence change politics? have a putsch. And that's why most civilian politicians are nervous about this idea of, yes, we need our autonomy, and we promise you that we will only defend you against enemies. But the military leadership could change their mind.
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
So it cannot be exist such kind of army nowadays in the world.
I don't think so. I don't think that's sustainable.
Right. So
No.
Burmese army, I think we should remove. Otherwise, it will be always make trouble the population, civilians. It's unfit in nowadays, right? Modern days.
Yeah, I don't think it's the right model for the 21st century.
Thank you, Dr. Ulrich. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation.